Anyway, so our next guest, Rich Sieben, did I pronounce that right? It is Rich, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I stole that from Lionel Strang. I hope he doesn't mind. Um, you're talking today about car floats on the Chicago River, but this is part of a big picture, right? With the Chicago Terminal District and three railroads represented and doing interchange with 29 others, which is pretty amazing. So I don't know how you possibly do this, but it looks like you're going to be showing us how with no staging. And so I'm anxious to see how you create these destination cards for so many cars without going crazy.
Yeah, I used an Excel spreadsheet to do that part.
Welcome,
Um,
Rich. Thank you so much.
so if we go to the slide presentation,
Yep.
we're on the first slide,
We're on the
the
first
title?
slide. Yep.
Okay. So you wouldn't think of Chicago as a place to have car floats. Usually the East Coast, like New York Harbor, even out in San Francisco, they had car floats. But Chicago, we're on the river. What are they doing? Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's not what I meant. This thing happened sometime. This was a stunt that was done sometime in the late 60s. When you do a Google search and you look for Chicago car floats, this is what you get the first time. Next slide, please. This is the kind of car float. This is actually a picture from New York Harbor, but they did this on the Chicago River as well.
Hmm.
Next slide. Okay. It all started in 1911. It was a winter like our polar vortex winter that we had here a few years ago. In 1911, the Chicago Junction started running car floats that would they would just load the cars on the float and go 20 miles upstream or downstream for any customers along the river. You have to remember at this time there were 500 industries on the Chicago River, so it was kind of a juicy plum as far as freight traffic was concerned. And if you had somebody that didn't have a railroad siding, they could still get railroad service via the car float. Later on, Erie Railroad leased space on the Roby Street float yard, which is belonged to Chicago Junction. And that started around 1913. Next slide, please. So this is a map of what the extent of Erie's marine operation came to be. The yellow box that circled there is where the Roby Street yard was. Then later moved it upstream to 18th Street, which is just south of the 14th Street Freight House, which is the first square box moving up from the yellow box, the black box. And then there were a couple other stations. There was a freight station, and then there were two float yards. Next slide, please. So Erie Railroad operations, the cars were moved from Roby Street via car float up to the Market Square station on the river. This was located at Market and Washington Streets. Freight was offloaded from the cars while they sat on the float. They didn't unload the cars themselves. They didn't take the cars off the float at that point. At some point, floats were also run to the North Pier Terminal. They had a similar operation with the cars staying on the float. But that's not even shown on that map, but I know that they did that as well. Starting August 1913, the Erie Street float yard went into operation, and the cars were removed from the floats, and they could unload covered barges as well. For uh, They had a freight station that was like 4 stories high. Next slide, please. So the Erie Street yard was at Kingsbury and Erie Streets in Chicago. This was adjacent to the Milwaukee's Kingsbury branch, and there was even an interchange with the Milwaukee at that point. There were a lot of industries down the Kingsbury branch as well, and on Goose Island. So this was a way for Erie to get to that. The yard had 3 team tracks and 2 tracks to serve a 4-story freight house, in addition to a couple storage tracks. All told, it held 37 cars. The freight house had a 37,700 square feet of floor space, and a 15-ton pillar crane was used for heavy loads. So you can assume flat cars or gondolas got there as well as box cars. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the area. Roby Street, or the Erie Street Yard, is right by that bridge that's got A1 in the river, and it turns sideways there. That little bit is it. Next slide, please. This is an actual track plan that I found of the Erie Street in later years. You can see where some switches had been removed, where they obviously would fit in. The freight house is there. It's kind of an odd shape, fit into the space down at the bottom right. And the car float, well, that's a float bridge actually that's up there on the left-hand side, kind of indented to the river. And that's where the floats would come up to the float bridge and offload and onload cars. Next slide, please. The Webster Avenue float yard was north of Goose Island. It had a bigger capacity for 60 cars and interchanged with the Chicago Northwestern's Old Line subdivision. Operations began in 1915 at this location, which also had a 13,000 square foot freight house that had the ability, I don't know if it was ever done, but had the ability to add a second story. So it could have been a 26,000, but I never saw any reference to that being 2-story. The yard serviced industries primarily in the Clybourne Industrial District. And this was like a hot place to be. There was a tractor plant that eventually became merged in with International Harvester right across the river. All kinds of industries on the river that didn't even have rail service directly. So it was a big deal for them to have access from 2 different streets into the float yard to get your goods from the team track. Webster was built in answer to it was a planned closing of the Market Square station in 1916. We had more than enough capacity to handle an additional work. This yard also had a 15-ton pillar crane for heavy loads. Next slide, please. So this is the only map I could find of the Webster yard. It's that little curlicue area with the funny shaped building in the middle there. That long thing is a freight platform where they would unload cars, but the number of tracks isn't exactly correct here. You'll see in some later pictures, you can actually see more tracks than are shown in this drawing. Next slide, please. Then there was the 18th Street float yard. This is around 1915. Chicago Junction raised the rate charge for handling freight cars at Roby Street 300%. And Erie wasn't going to have any of that. So they were part owner of the Chicago and Western Indiana Railroad, and they were able to obtain a yard from Chicago and Western Indiana to use as a new float yard. This area is now Ping Tom Park in Chicago, across the river from the Amtrak Road. Next slide, please. So this is the Chicago River on 1916 when the river was being straightened. You see how it curves off there to the right. That was the original way the river went. So they straightened it and they channeled it out so they could reverse the flow of the Chicago River. Downtown, I know the river is 27 feet deep. That's how far down they had to dredge. Those arrows down toward the bottom of the picture, the upper arrow is where the float bridge is at. And the bottom arrow, you can see a car float parked there in the river alongside of the float yard. So I was real happy to get a picture of the actual car float out there. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of a barge. They had barges, were covered barges. They could hold about 6 carloads of material, and they would take these up and downstream to customers that didn't have rail service, and they would offload this just like they did the box cars on the car float. It was just another way of doing it. They had 2 of these. Next slide, please. So this is a picture, and it's hard to see because it's a very grainy picture, but it's a tug landing a car float at the float bridge at Erie Street. You have to look real hard, but you notice that looks like there's a couple cars on the car float there. And I think I even see the little gasoline engine retrieving cars off of the float. But we have better pictures of that. Next slide, please. So that's the 300 horsepower gasoline engine that they had. They had 3 of them. One at Erie, one at Webster, and the third one was supposed to be used either in rotation or at 18th Street, but it ended up being absconded with by the, or requisitioned was the word, by the USRA for the war effort. So they actually never had that one. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of the float bridge at Webster Avenue. The float bridge at Erie looked just like this. It was the same setup. A little Y track and just 2 tracks for the car float. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the Webster Avenue station. So here's that platform, that freight platform that I told you about. You can see there's 2 tracks on either side of it. So they would offload cars through one set of cars. So they could have 2 sets of cars on each side there, and they would take stuff to the freight station. There's on the far right-hand side, you see some cars curving off. So those must have been some storage tracks. That wasn't in that crude map that I had. So they really cut down the number of tracks in those early maps. And then to the left, that track there is a team track. You notice the wide space between it and the next track. So cars would come in, trucks could come in off of Elston Avenue and directly unload boxcars there. And then there was another track that you don't see in this picture to the left of that one that went all the way around in back of that freight house building and then up the hill, up the grade to come in with the Chicago Northwestern Old Line subdivision. So that was their interchange there. Next slide, please. So why would Erie put car floats in Chicago? Well, they had no direct connection to the industrial north side of Chicago. Remember, I said there were 500 industries, so this was a sweet plum of customers to try to get into. Direct transfer by car float allowed Erie to offer delivery 48 hours faster than interchanging the cars with other railroads. But the real reason, I think, was there was no universal switching tariff in Chicago at that time. So anytime a load was originated, the originating road got 50% of the revenue for the entire shipping distance. The remaining 50% of the revenue was split by each railroad that touched the car based on how many miles they hauled it. So a smaller railroad like Erie was at a disadvantage to larger roads like Pennsylvania Railroad. They could originate a load in Chicago and hand it off to the Pennsylvania right in Chicago, and they'd still get half the revenue. And Pennsylvania Railroad would have to work with the rest, or whoever else they handed off to. They'd have to have divisions of the freight. Next slide, please. So their marine operations ran from 1913 until 1936. There was a short period of about 3 years, and I don't remember those exact years, that it was kind of all embargoed for the war effort, but then they started it up again. I think that might have been up to like 1934. So it didn't run too long after the war. Sometime after 1916, the North Pier Terminal at the mouth of the Chicago River right off, the corner of Lake Michigan and the river, got serviced by offloading cars from the float while the cars sat on the float. Erie had 2 tugs working Chicago, 5 covered barges that could hold up to 6 carloads of goods, 2 car floats with 4 car capacity, 2 with 8 car capacity. And as I said, they actually purchased 3 gasoline powered switch engines. Next slide, please. So this is really the last slide in my deck. If you take this link and plug it into your browser, you'll see like a 3-minute and 48-second video of the operation. The operation shows loading a car at Erie Street, how they would put the routing on the car, put the seal on the car, and then they show you actually loading the car onto the float with the little 300 horsepower engine. It's pretty fun to see. And then they as they pull away from the river, they want you to take note of the fact that there's not any smoke out of their stack because they burned anthracite. This was, after all, the railroad of the Phoebe Snow and the road of anthracite. It was clean burning. Well, then they make a point of showing you another barge coming by, and it's smoking like the dickens. And so they're just trying to show the difference of their operation from everybody else that's on the river. And you'll notice in all the pictures, it's hazy. That's how cruddy the air was in Chicago at that time. There was coal smoke everywhere. Everybody burned coal. The building I work in burned coal, and they used the underground freight tunnels to haul the ashes away. So that's what all the big buildings downtown did. So I'll show you, if you can put the screen back to me, to my phone. Okay, there we go. Let's see, let me flip it around. No, it's not working. Well, I wanted to show you, hey, here's how it is, switch camera. On my layout, this is Roby Street Yard, right here. So these cars would be lined up for loading to those covered barges. And cars here would be going to either to the car float or elsewhere. And you come around here and I have my car float. So I would load cars onto this car float, and then I put them in this box. There's my car cards, and I take the cars over to the North Pier terminal, which in my world actually had the cars offload onto the terminal from the car float. So this is the North Pier terminal. The buildings are awful. They were my first renditions of buildings. But so we got some cars here lined up to come off, and we'll put those cars on. I don't know if you want to watch us actually do that operation. It's like a fiddle yard. You fiddle the cars off and fiddle the new cars on, and then you switch them to their locations. So I don't know if you want to actually see that, or if you want to go to questions.
You mind rotating your camera?
Sure. All right. John, you want to handle the camera?
We certainly have time, Rich, if you would like to show
Okay,
an
that's
example,
fine. We'll do that.
Rich, can you rotate your camera?
Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
So this is the float being loaded.
What is the handlebar for?
The handlebar. Oh, this is a portable section of the layout. So I can take it with me, or I just move it to, it's just sitting on a freezer right now. So now he's going to add the cars that supposedly came in off the car float and put them on the track. I got re-railers there to make it easy to do.
There's a comment that you've been doing some ballasting lately. It looks really nice.
Yes, I have. If you want, I'll show you what I've done scenery wise. I can do that while we're putting these cars on if you want. So this is the Elsden Avenue yard. It's all ballasted. I was trying different colors for the ballast until I settled on kind of this battleship gray color on the left. This part over here takes you to my temporary section of the layout. This is represents the Belt Railway of Chicago. So this will all get ripped out, and the form of the table will stay the same. It's just it'll be a glass plant back here instead. And I'll be building a replacement yard for that. Let me duck under here.
Rich, who's helping you today?
Oh, that's my nephew, John.
Hello.
Hey, John.
So here I have the engine house and the Elsden industrial area right here. I have various industries here. Then this is the 33rd Street yard, which services the paper plant and the brewery, which is on the other side of the screen block, view block from here. There's the paper plant. A couple other little industries implied over here. I've done a lot of scenery. Each little section is like a little art project onto itself. And those buildings on the back are just building flats, just more implied industries. Over here, we got the brewery. And then the Illinois Northern continues on around that way, you know, through that darkened space. We have the 26th Street Industries over there. Over there
Oh,
is
your garage
26th.
door is open. Great.
Yes, it is. 26th Street Yard over there. It's so nice out today. I got to have it open.
Where are you located, Rich?
Island Lake, Illinois.
Okay, you got a cold water tower there because we're on our way.
So this is back to Roby Street. This Y is where the Chicago Junction takes over. So now at this point, we're on the Chicago Junction. Have the Farkle factory. See the Farkle factory and the Farkle silo. Then we have the Ashland Avenue yard. And these are all the interchange tracks to other railroads in this yard. There's this yard has a total of 26 tracks, and the real Ashland Avenue yard today has 26 tracks. I didn't plan that. That was a total accident. And then this is the departure yard for Ashland Avenue. So this is where I make up the trains. Really, you sort by color. The colors represent different switching areas on the layout. There's some industries back here along the back wall. Nice little engine terminal here.
Explain the color again. Are these the tags
yeah,
that we're looking at?
Sure. See the map up here on the wall? The color,
Okay, gotcha.
that's the area of the layout. And each color represents a different switching district, if you will, or who is responsible for it. So when I have a full crew, everybody's got a different color. The yards are obviously a little different. You know, the 16 tracks over here are each one's a different railroad. So as you switch cars to a different the idea is it's going to be going off the railroad. So that's like my staging. Here's my box of cards with the different colors for the cards. And you can see that the colors are indicated on the cards as to where it's going next. The next blank line that doesn't have anything written on the right-hand side is where the car is going next. And when I put a car in a spot, if we have enough people, like 7 or more, we'll use a real-time clock and we'll put in the whole hour. So if it's 8 o'clock, we're going to put in at 8 when you spot the car. And the car has to sit there for 2 real hours in order to be eligible for pickup again. If we have less than that, we do it as a turn-based item. And so everything is, what turn is it for this job? Well, this is turn 8 over here. So you would put in an 8 for everything. And then once you've done your setouts and your pickups, then it becomes turn 9. This is the Loomis Avenue yard back here. And here we have the Vantage chemical plant. And I even have a picture of the actual Vantage chemical plant. So I have the same feel of it. It's not exact, but I had to compress it somehow. But the number of tracks are actually the same that are in here. They're just a lot shorter. And I have some industries. Pardon me?
Oh, I was going to say, someone says that he's lived in Chicago his whole life, and he was not aware of the car floats. So it's very cool that people are enjoying the history here.
Okay. So I have some industries along here. This part is the Chicago Central Manufacturing District, which was actually the nation's first industrial park. And they had various industries and very tight quarters. I'll show you a map of what that looked like. I got a power plant with I love this. I had fun building this. This is a PD Marsh substation, because the district actually had its own power plant. So I had to throw one in there. But I can show you this map, the map of the real world. That's Ashland Avenue Yard right there. Then you had the stockyards right there. Just north of the stockyards, this area, this was the Central Manufacturing District. So they would sell you the land, build the building for you, and you would get a service time every day for your siding to be switched. And this I stuck in over here. It really belongs in the Illinois Northern, but it didn't work on the layout. So I moved the International Harvester plant over here. And in my world, they're making cars.
Your friend Dave Hammer says that when you have less operators, like 4, you will probably be doing all of the jobs, maybe assigned to 2 yards and 2 car floats.
Yeah, we would hop around to different jobs. Let me flip my camera around again. Okay. So that's kind of it, unless you want to see them actually switch these cars.
I'm game. I mean, you have time, Rich, if you want to go ahead and show us how you get started. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can show it while I'm answering questions. So let me flip my camera around again. Well,
one question is, where did you get all these maps, of these old maps that you have on the walls?
I found them online. They are, what do they call it? The smoke abatement maps. There was a whole thing that, because there was so much smoke in Chicago, they were proposing electrifying almost all the railroads. And in fact, that's where the Illinois Central got its electric trains from, because they passed the lakefront ordinance that would not allow any steam locomotives on the lakefront. So they had to switch to electric. Diesel wasn't available yet. Electric came before diesel, believe it or not.
Someone named Steve Ripito basically said that he has explored the Chicago Tunnel around 1963. He has worked on Goose Island, and he sounds like he might be someone you would like to connect with regarding some history of the area.
Yeah. Sure, that sounds good. I know
What is
Goose
there
Island had
today where the car
today.
floats were? Hmm.
Oh, at 18th Street, it's Ping Tom Park. Uh, the tracks are the only track that's left in there is the CP has a track through there, and Illinois Central does. That's it. There's no yards anymore. At Erie Street, there's a building on the property, and there's a park there. At Webster Avenue, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's a Best Buy is in part of that property. So it's
How,
all been dug under.
so tell us about your track work. How do you keep it all so well running and so you don't have derailments? Well, I imagine you have some problems, but this one gentleman says, Dan Cohen said, if I had that track work, I'd have 26 derailments a day on 26 tracks.
You learn to have a lighter touch, number one. But no, if you just pay attention to how you put the tracks together, it's the details are small and you just have to look closely sometimes. If you have a problem somewhere, you just keep at it until you find the problem. Sometimes you'll think you have the rails together and they're actually one of the rails is on top of the rail joiner instead of into it. So you got to pull it back apart and slip it in properly. That's been one of my biggest finds, is how things just don't go right.
So do you
But yeah,
actually mark?
I've run this layout for a while with no scenery so that I could pick track up and fix it.
I guess
And
that
now I'm
should have been
starting
my
to do
next
scenery.
question before I forget. How long have you been working on this railroad?
The first section I built in, I think it was about 2005. And that's all I had for quite a while. And then I started adding on probably 2010. So
Wow.
this section over here, from the paper mill back to there was a 2-foot by 8-foot section. That was my test layout. It was my wife's. I was going to build a HO layout, and my wife says, "Why don't you do the little ones?" I said, "You mean N scale?" She goes, "Yeah." So I remember N scales being pretty much junk when I was a kid. And I said, "Well, I'll try it. I'll build a test layout and see if I can do switching with it. If I can, I'm good." And
It
I
seems to
can.
be running pretty well right now. I don't see a lot of shaking, rattling, and rolling there.
No, it works pretty well. It's the equipment has gotten a lot better over the years. It's not junk anymore.
Dave says he's usually the one that finds the problems. So
Yeah. Well, I've tried to find, before I started scenery on this layout, every morning before I go to work, I would run for about 10 minutes out here doing some switch. So I know exactly how long every job takes because I had
I
to do
think
it in 10 to 15 minutes.
the best way to troubleshoot any layout is to have some friends over, operators run it. I mean, these are
Oh,
not the
yeah.
kind of things that you would normally do. But one guy says I could sit up all night watching this kind of stuff. I think this is interesting to watch your nephew running the trains around. There was a question regarding loading and unloading a car float. Do you simulate balancing a load, moving
I
multiple
did
loads,
initially.
unloading them? Yeah.
Yeah, I did initially. In fact, before I had Ashland Avenue Yard in there, that the railroad only went that far to Roby Street. I actually used a re-railer to stand in as a scale, and you'd have to weigh every car. And to weigh a car, you rolled a die, so it was 1 through 6, and then you had to try to balance the cars on the float, and
I
that
think
gave extra work to do.
someone makes a simulated weight track, right?
Yes, I was planning on doing that too, but then when it got too busy, it just there's no time for that. It took away from the play value and just made it extra work, unappreciated work. Or maybe that's better, huh?
Hey, that's pretty good. I'm curious, what's next? Are you going to go back and start doing a little more scenery now that things are running pretty well?
Yeah, I got 80% of the layout has scenery on it, so I got about another 20% to do. As I said, that Belt Railway of Chicago section, most of that's going to be ripped up and redone for the new glass plant. And then this area right above where John is working now, I'm going to have another yard and a small mini mill, steel mill, and a sand quarry to feed sand, silica sand to the glass plant. I always got to have another yard.
Yeah, I've been around a few industrial railroads, and in particular, the car ferry float that went out of Port Townsend to Seattle, and I don't remember anything looking this clean. They're dirty, ugly looking yards and cars. So,
yeah, I got to get some more trash out there in the scenery.
pretty dark.
Stuff that looks like littered boxes and newspapers laying around.
The car ferry
that'll
float
come
up
over.
in British Columbia, Lake Sloan, I think it was. They usually transported a locomotive out to the remote areas to switch the train. But in Chicago, did they run an engine on the car floats?
Only if they were going to bring the locomotive in for servicing, they might load it up on the car float and take it there, because it was the only way Erie could get their engine to their engine house. They certainly wouldn't want to interchange that.
I imagine they're pretty heavy for a car float, and they'd have to balance it pretty carefully, right?
Yeah, but that engine was small. It was only 300 horsepower. It was really only
Right.
made to pull a few cars. If you go to that URL and watch that movie and you see it in action, it's like, yeah, probably 4 cars is all it can handle, because it's just a little 4-wheel deal.
Gotcha. Looks like John's getting stuff squared away over there. So is he building up the outbound trains here?
Yeah,
That's the outbound
Yeah.
float. That'll be the next float out.
he's making the next float out,
Gotcha.
and then he can switch the individual industry tracks.
You don't actually model the barges, the floats themselves, eh?
Just that one that sits over there by Roby Street, well, that's just permanently mounted there. I was going to carry the cars over on the car float, and then it came to me that you'll never be able to carry this and keep the cars on the track. They'll be falling all over.
I imagine even if you had a cart and really smooth floors, that could be a challenge.
Right. Yeah, there's just not enough width in N scale cars to be able to carry them on a track someplace. They'll just flop over on you. HO might be a little more forgiving in that, if you wanted to. It's a little wider stance on the rails, and the cars are heavier.
Yeah. Do you weight your cars, your N scale freight cars?
I do. Either go to the NMRA standard or sometimes above. If the car is a problem child, sometimes it just needs more weight to run right.
I don't see them
And if it
bouncing
continues
around or shaking back and
Yeah.
forth. So
If it continues to be a problem, the car comes off the layout. That's like a last resort.
So what do you do to keep your track clean so you don't have that little 4-wheeler pausing, or do you have a keep alive or stay alive in that little loco?
Well, see, it just paused right there. It's on those,
The frogs,
mostly on the frogs. Yeah, there's not much I can do about that. But normally, cleaning tracks is something that I only do spot cleaning. If you run frequently enough, it seems to keep that. I really think it's dust on the rails is the whole problem. If you keep the dust off the rails by running frequently, you won't have problems. And
are your frogs dead or are they live?
yeah, they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
So it works pretty well.
I was thinking if you had to buy frog juicers for all those switches, you'd go broke really fast.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, there's no way. These are all, that's why I have all manual switches. The cost would be astronomical. I've got over 200 switches on the layout,
I was going to ask that
700,
question next.
700 cars. I got 118 industries. Probably about 60 locomotives. And I've kept as many as 13 people busy here at one time.
Did you say you have 60 as in 60 locomotives?
Yes. I
And
like
they're all on the
locomotives.
Yeah, well, how many locomotives does anyone need?
True. Yeah.
There's not a number there. So do you have all the locos on the layout? I mean, they're not running all at one time.
Most of them are actually. A couple are not.
Wow. And what kind of
So I've
system
got to
are you
build another
using? I
engine
assume
terminal.
it's DCC, isn't it?
Yes. This little section here, this North Pier terminal, is actually DC.
Okay.
So
But
I have this locomotive and another one. I can actually 2 others I can run here that are DC. Everything else I have is DCC.
and the handheld control I saw earlier looked like it might be Lens or something like that.
No, it's Digitrax.
Oh, it is Digitrax. Okay. So that automobile car, whatever it is, didn't seem to like the switch very well, did it?
Oh,
Yeah, there you go. Tell me again how many locomotives you have. You have 60, but how many do you have in total?
that's probably in total.
Oh, okay. And 700 freight cars.
Right.
Good
They're all
grief.
on the layout.
Dave actually points out you have 61 locomotives.
Yeah, I guess I forgot this one.
So you actually have an interface. Is it through JMRI or an interface to the Digitrax system so you can use a cell phone for controlling the trains and engines?
I have the what do they call it? LNWI,
Right.
Digitrax interface. So I can have up to 4 cell phones as a radio throttle.
And are you using metal or plastic wheels?
Plastic. Metal wheels have been a problem.
Really?
Wherever I've
Okay.
had metal wheels. If I have a problem car, chances are it's metal wheels on it. So you see, he just spotted this car and he wrote the turn in there, turn 9. So now this car isn't eligible for pickup until turn 11.
Okay. You're not doing any detection or signaling right now at this point? I mean, obviously
No,
with plastic wheels. Huh? Mm-hmm.
right. This is all yard limits. Signaling would be problematic with all the switches and that.
Dave points out that you don't have any plastic wheels on your engines.
That's true. Dave is correct.
He's also suggesting that you show us the refrigerator. I don't really care about the refrigerator. I'm more interested in the contents.
Ah, you mean the keg of beer inside?
Aha! Exactly. Thank you, Dave, for pointing
Got to
that
have
out.
refreshments, you know.
Now we just want to hear about you home brewing. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a brewery on the railroad and I actually do brew beer.
Sweet. So if you're doing a brown ale, I need to get on a plane.
I have one here.
Damn it. I knew it. We have a few more minutes if you want to give us kind of an overview. We don't need to look in the freezer. There's always things in there like skeletons in the closet. Let's not do that, Gert. Okay.
The
Dave
freezer has more
suggests
kegs.
Mr. Hammer suggests show them the numbers for turns. What does that mean?
Oh,
And I've been corrected by Ralph Renzetti, the mud father, that it's not a refrigerator. That's the water tower.
the water
Okay,
tower.
what does that mean?
These are the different switch jobs, like BRC, Argo, it's turn 10. Eldeston Yard, it's turn 9. So, like I said, if we have enough people here and we use a real-time clock, we would ignore this board and just look at the clock. But when we have fewer than 7, we use this board to determine what time is it. And basically it's a cycle, you pick up cars and you set out cars. Now it's a new turn. So we update the turn on this whiteboard. So that's all the different areas and where their status right now.
And again, the colors represent the yard limits for each of the different railroads, right?
No, this is for each switching district.
Switching district, rather. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So everybody must
railroad-
just memorize, or you have a really good map somewhere.
Yeah, I showed you the map on the wall, the colored one.
Right.
This one. It shows the layout and what the different areas are.
So where is John working right now on the map?
Well, he's actually not on the map. The float yard didn't fit on here. So that's a separate piece all by itself.
Okay.
After all, you're shipping it down the river, so.
Well, we're kind of reaching the end of our time here. I did want to shout out to Ralph for checking in. Thank you. Dazzy J is here. Andy, thank you for all of your funny comments. Jerry Hopkins and Lori McLean were on earlier, and if you don't know these guys, they're all worth checking out because everybody here is talented, and I'm glad that they have checked in to see what you're doing. So, Rich, thank you so much for what you're doing and sharing it with us.
All right, thank you for watching. Thanks for watching.